how do you feel? Have you had time to reflect on everything yet? I stood there, face to face with my husband, the man who had thrown me out of the house after blindly believing his stepchild's lies. He wore an air of superiority, looking down on me as if he knew everything. I couldn't help but laugh. Reflect? No, not at all, I said calmly, pulling a stack of papers from my bag. Now, please sign here. I handed him the divorce papers and legal documents my lawyer had prepared. He maintained his calm demeanor as he took the papers, signing them without protest, until he saw the attached documents. His expression froze, his hand trembling slightly. Beside him, his stepchild, Jim, began to panic. The lies they had so carefully constructed had been exposed, and the truth laid bare. Let me backtrack a bit. My name is Mary. I'm a 52-year-old office worker who had been married for just a year. I lived with my husband and his adult son, Jim, who worked full-time but refused to leave the house he'd grown up in. I never adopted Jim, so to me, he was little more than a stranger. From the beginning, I had hoped he would move out, but Jim dug in his heels. This is my mother's house, he explained firmly. She died 5 years ago, and I won't leave the home I shared with her. I sympathized, having lost my first husband around the same time Jim's mother passed, but sympathy didn't make his defiance any easier to live with. My mom was a better cook, but I guess I'll eat this, Jim muttered one evening, picking at the meal I'd prepared with a sigh of disdain. He didn't bother hiding his contempt, and it wore me down. If my cooking was so unbearable, why didn't he make his own meals? Frustrated, I turned to my husband. Jim clearly doesn't like my cooking. What should I do? My husband shrugged. Then stop cooking for him. He doesn't have to eat it. His indifference stung, but I followed his advice. The next time Jim came home to no dinner, he exploded. Why isn't there food for me? You married my dad, so it's your job to make my meals too, right? No matter what I did, I couldn't win. Jim's comments grew nastier, and my husband's refusal to intervene left me feeling isolated. Before we married, my husband had assured me that Jim would move out soon. Yet here we were, and Jim showed no signs of leaving. He just can't afford to live on his own, my husband claimed, though I knew better. Jim had inherited a substantial estate from his late mother and squandered much of it on luxury items. His extravagant lifestyle wasn't a secret. Collection notices from credit card companies piled up in his room. I didn't even bother telling my husband anymore. Jim wasn't just reckless with money, he was dismissive of me, and my husband's passivity only enabled him. It wasn't long before I realized the man I married wasn't as steadfast as I thought. I confided in my daughter, Emma. Maybe Jim just loves living at home, she suggested, but if I were him, I'd never impose on newlyweds like this. Her words gave me clarity. I had spent too long tolerating the intolerable. It was time to take control of my life again. I got proposed to. Hearing my daughter's excited announcement, I couldn't help but smile. Since my remarriage, good news had been scarce, so this brought a rare moment of joy. I knew she had been dating someone for a while, and I'd been wondering when she'd take the step. Congratulations, I exclaimed warmly. I'm sure your father in heaven is smiling too. As I said it, memories of my late husband came rushing back. He had worried about our daughter's future until his final moments. I felt certain he would have been relieved to see her find happiness. I'll introduce my fiancé to you soon, Emma said, then her tone shifted. But, do I have to introduce him to Brian? He's just your second husband, he has nothing to do with me. Her hesitation was clear, and I couldn't blame her. She had her reasons for feeling distant from Brian. Just greet him briefly, I said, hoping to ease her discomfort. Unlike Jim, my stepson, Emma didn't live with us, and she hadn't been adopted by Brian. She'd told her fiancé about her late father and my remarriage, but she didn't have a high opinion of Brian or Jim, largely because I had vented to her about them. Explain the situation to him yourself, she said with a small, awkward smile. I don't really want to meet them. When I told Brian about Emma's engagement, he barely reacted. His indifference stung, but I wasn't surprised. He'd never shown much interest in Emma. Later, Jim made a snide remark. Why don't you just divorce Dad and live with your daughter? You probably hate living with us anyway. Shocked, I looked to Brian for support, but as usual, he walked out of the room without saying a word. Jim's comment wasn't surprising. He often used any opportunity to push me out of the house. Annoyed, I snapped back. Don't you have someone special in your life? Why don't you get married and give your father and mother some peace of mind? Jim scowled, his irritation evident, and walked away without answering. He rarely talked about relationships, and I doubted he had a partner. Brian, as always, didn't seem to care enough to discuss Jim's future. The thought crossed my mind, what if Jim got married and decided to live here with his wife? The idea filled me with dread. I brought it up to Brian. Do you think Jim will want to stay here after getting married? I asked. Just leave it to Jim. I don't care either way, he replied dismissively. His indifference was infuriating. It seemed he had long since given up on encouraging Jim to move out. Eventually, I met Emma's fiancé. Before the meeting, I asked Brian if he wanted to come along. Predictably, he refused. "I don't care about that. You don't need to invite me to the wedding, either," he said flatly. Though disappointed, I ignored him and went alone. Emma's fiancé turned out to be a wonderful person, mature, reliable, and kind. He was around Jim's age, but carried himself with far more grace and responsibility. "You found yourself a great man," I said, feeling genuinely relieved. When I remarried Brian, I thought I had found someone dependable too. How wrong I had been. Emma's fiancé lived alone and handled all his household chores. Compared to Jim, who refused to lift a finger, he seemed like a dream. If I'd been Jim's biological mother, I thought, I'd have taught him to take responsibility and contribute to the household. I started to worry about what the future held. Brian and I were still healthy, but I doubted Jim would take care of either of us in old age, not me, and probably not even his own father. Emma noticed my worried expression. "What's wrong? Are you unhappy about the wedding?" She joked lightly. I decided to share my concerns about Jim. Her fiancé, overhearing, smiled reassuringly. "I've heard about Jim from Emma. Don't worry, we'll take good care of you. If things don't work out with your husband and his son, you can always come live with us." His kindness brought me a sense of relief I hadn't felt in years. When I returned home late that night, Jim greeted me with his usual disdain. "A housekeeper shouldn't be late. Dad and I are starving," he complained. Hearing him call me a housekeeper stung, but Brian, true to form, pretended not to hear. Compared to Emma's mature fiancé, Brian and Jim seemed even more pathetic. I wanted to snap back. "If you're hungry, cook for yourselves," but I bit my tongue and silently prepared dinner. Lately, Brian had been spending his weekends out of the house, leaving me alone with Jim. While I preferred being alone to dealing with Jim, it made me question the purpose of our marriage. We had talked about spending our lives together, but he was off doing whatever he wanted. "Where do you go every weekend?" I asked one day. "Take me with you sometime." "I'm not going out for fun," he said, looking troubled. "A friend's mother is in the hospital, so I'm helping out." "Every weekend?" I asked, suspicious. I decided to confront Brian about his suspicious behavior. "Is this friend you're helping a woman?" I asked bluntly. Brian panicked, hastily denying it, but his flustered reaction only deepened my doubts. From that point, he continued spending weekends out, and our relationship deteriorated further. Noticing the growing tension, Jim seemed delighted. He smirked as he approached me. "Dad probably regrets marrying an old lady like you. Maybe he wishes he'd married someone younger. You're going to get cheated on and kicked out. Poor thing." I was furious at his spiteful words, but given Brian's behavior, I couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to them. Jim didn't seem to know anything concrete, he was just saying it to hurt me. "Why don't you just give up on Dad and leave before things get messy?" Jim added with a smirk. His remark pushed me to realize that I needed to investigate Brian's actions. But first, I snapped back. "If I leave, who's going to cook and clean for you? You don't do any housework, do you?" Jim glared at me and stormed off. If I left, I knew Jim would struggle. Brian had handled everything before I moved in, but the house had been a mess. Meals had come from the supermarket, and cleaning was non-existent. If I left, it would likely return to that state. Worse, I wondered if Brian intended to replace me with his mistress. Just as I was sinking deeper into my thoughts, Emma called. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Can you come over?" she asked, her voice serious. Worried, I hurried to her place. Her fiancé, Jack, was there as well. "What's the matter? Don't tell me you're calling off the wedding," I said anxiously. They both smiled awkwardly. "Why would we cancel the wedding? This is about you, not us." Relieved, I was caught off guard by their next revelation. Jack showed me his phone and asked, "Is this your husband, Brian?" I didn't recognize him at first, but then I noticed the young woman next to him calling him by name. After examining the photo closely, I realized it was indeed Brian, wearing clothes I had seen before. The photo was taken at a wedding venue, and they were discussing their own wedding plans. I was speechless. Brian had no children other than Jim, so the young woman couldn't be his daughter. It was unthinkable that he was planning to marry someone else while still married to me. "That woman looks far too young to be Jim's girlfriend, doesn't she?" Emma asked. I recalled Brian's recent suspicious behavior and admitted, "I've suspected he might be cheating, but I never imagined he'd be with someone so young." Emma and Jack were shocked. I told them everything: Brian's evasive behavior, his frequent absences, and my growing suspicions. "Your husband is awful. We need to properly investigate and make sure he takes responsibility," Jack said firmly. "You need to divorce him immediately, Mom," Emma added. I agreed but knew we needed evidence first. Jack started searching for private investigators. Don't worry about your future, Mom, you can come live with us, he reassured me. Feeling supported, I returned home with a newfound determination. Jim greeted me the same way he always did. Hurry up and make dinner, housekeepers shouldn't be out so late, he said dismissively. His attitude irritated me, but I started preparing dinner as usual. I was determined not to let him see me struggle. Once I had proof of Brian's affair, I would leave. If Brian remarried, Jim would have to rely on his new stepmother, and he wouldn't be able to treat her the same way he treated me. When Brian came home, I decided to test him. Will you be attending our daughter's wedding? They're having it at a prestigious venue, I said, casually mentioning the name of the venue in the photo. Brian's face stiffened for a moment before he denied knowing the place. His reaction confirmed my suspicions, but I decided not to press further for now. Then Brian changed the subject. Jim hasn't asked you for money, has he? He's been struggling financially lately. I shook my head. Jim had never asked me for money. He didn't see me as anything more than a housekeeper and didn't expect help from me. He's been pestering me for money, Brian continued. Despite inheriting a large sum from his mother, he blew through it all. Now he's asking me for help. I thought about the debt collection notices I had found while cleaning Jim's room, but I didn't tell Brian. I couldn't bring myself to confide in a man who was likely cheating on me. Besides, I feared Jim's reaction if he found out I had seen them. He'd probably scream at me and tell me to stay out of his business. Housekeeper. I haven't heard anything about that, I said instead. Can't you talk to him about it? Tell him to stop wasting money, Brian pleaded. I was stunned. Jim doesn't listen to me. He sees me as nothing but a housekeeper. You're his father, you should talk to him. But Brian kept pushing. Don't be so cold, please. I'm not good at dealing with tough conversations. His insistence only made me more disappointed in him. The next day, he continued to press me. Have you talked to Jim about the money yet? What did he say? When I told him I hadn't, he grew angry. What are you doing? You need to talk to Jim about this right away. Fed up with his nagging, I resolved to focus on gathering evidence of his affair. Once I had it, I would finally be free of Brian and Jim. Reluctantly, I approached Jim. Your father is worried about your spending, I began, choosing my words carefully. He asked me to remind you to be more careful with money. I tried to sound as non-confrontational as possible, but Jim exploded in anger. Who do you think you are, housekeeper? He sneered. It's my money, and I'll spend it however I want. It's none of your business. I could see why Brian had avoided this conversation. Jim was impossible to reason with. Still, I couldn't help but wish Brian, as his father, would handle this himself. It was becoming increasingly clear that Brian cared little for his son's issues and was entirely focused on his affair. Jim glared at me with hatred. I'll get you kicked out of this house, just wait. His words stung, but I reminded myself that once I had proof of Brian's infidelity, I would leave on my own terms. A few days later, Emma called me with the results of the investigation. Mom, we have the proof, she said firmly. Can you meet Jack and me at a local restaurant? My heart sank. Was it true? Did he really cheat on me? I asked. Emma's fury was evident. Yes, it's true. He's been seeing a woman much younger than you. They're even looking for a new house together. Jack handed me the investigation report, filled with undeniable evidence, countless photos of Brian with his mistress. You need to divorce him right away, Jack advised. This woman seems very suspicious. She's been spending extravagantly and might be seeing other men besides your husband. She could be planning to take his money and leave him. Hearing this made me realize how deeply Brian had fallen for this woman's schemes. They had already visited a wedding venue, and she might have taken money for wedding preparations and a new house. Jack's words gave me a sense of urgency. I needed to act quickly. After discussing the next steps with Emma and Jack, I returned home, the investigation report in hand. When I arrived, I found Jim and Brian talking in the living room. Mary, come here, we need to talk. Brian called me over with a serious expression. I thought it was the perfect opportunity to confront him. Jim smirked as he glanced at me. You've been seeing a younger guy, haven't you? Dad saw you at a family restaurant with him today. Jim showed a blurry photo on his phone of me with Jack, caught red-handed. How embarrassing, dating someone the same age as your daughter. Jim was gloating, but I refused to let it affect me. That's Emma's fiancé, and she was with us at the restaurant, I said calmly. But Brian wouldn't listen. Jim caught you in the act. You've been cheating on me, haven't you? Dad, kick her out. Let's live together again like before, Jim urged. I agree with Jim, Brian said arrogantly. Leave this house, Mary, we'll deal with the divorce and money later. I could hardly believe his audacity. I felt like laughing at how clueless he was. All right, I said coolly. I'll leave. We can discuss the divorce and financial matters later. As I walked toward the door, Jim yelled, make us dinner before you go. I'm hungry. Even at that moment, all he cared about was food. I ignored him and left the house with the investigation report in my bag. I went straight to Emma's house and explained what had happened. "I can't believe they mocked me for your lover," Jack said, shaking his head. "Their minds are delusional." I knew I had made the right choice by leaving. Emma and Jack promised to help me with the divorce proceedings. Just to be sure, I asked, "Are you sure you'll be okay with me living with you after you're married?" "Of course, Mom, we want you to live with us," Emma reassured me. 3 weeks passed before Brian finally contacted me. "Let's meet and discuss things at the house. Bring the divorce papers," he said. On the day of the meeting, I arrived with Emma, Jack, and our lawyer. Brian's face paled when he saw us. "Why didn't you come alone?" he stammered. "You never said I had to come alone," I replied. The house was a mess. Even after just 3 weeks, it was already filthy. Brian sneered. "Even with all these people, you'll still pay alimony." I laughed. "I've done nothing wrong. Here, sign these." I handed him the divorce papers. Brian froze when he saw the documents. "Why am I paying alimony? You're the one who cheated," he protested, showing the blurry photo again. Our lawyer handed him the investigator's report. "We have proof of your affair," he said firmly. Brian's face turned ashen as he read the report. Jim, too, was speechless. "I can't pay alimony. I'm broke. I borrowed money for the wedding and honeymoon," Brian admitted. Jim's true motives became clear. "You're not remarrying, are you?" "I don't want to lose half of your inheritance." Brian looked defeated. "I've already spent all of Mom's inheritance," he confessed. Jim collapsed in disbelief. "Dad, can't you lend me some money? You've got some left, right?" Brian begged Jim for help, but Jim had none to give. I reminded them both. "Jim, I found debt collection notices in your room. At your age, asking your mom to clean your room is just embarrassing." The lawyer presented the alimony documents, and Brian reluctantly signed them. Jack added, "I heard your mistress is spending your money and seeing other men." Brian turned white as a sheet. Frantically, he tried to call her, but she didn't pick up. "Mary, I'm sorry, don't leave us," Jim begged. "Dad's never home, and I'm tired of eating junk food." I refused. "Ask your father's new wife. You'll have a young housekeeper soon enough." We left them behind and headed straight to City Hall to file for divorce. Afterward, I moved in with Emma and Jack. It was a bit cramped, but we were planning to move to a bigger place soon. A few weeks later, I heard that Brian's mistress had scammed him. She had taken a large sum of money for a wedding that would never happen. He had been left with nothing but debt. Jim called me, begging for help. "Mom, Dad moved out, and I have nowhere to go." "I'm not your mother," I reminded him. "We're not related, and I've divorced your father." Eventually, Jack threatened to report Jim to the police if he kept harassing me. That finally scared him off. Life with Emma and Jack was peaceful. Soon, we received wonderful news. Emma was pregnant. I was thrilled to become a grandmother and focused on preparing for her wedding and our growing family. Life was finally looking up, and I was determined to cherish every moment with my loved ones.